Okay, it's Paul with Ryobi Press Parts. Today we're going to rebuild this plate clamp here. This is on a 3302M Ryobi that I removed it out of. And a few of the tools that you'll need are 4mm Allen, 2.5mm Allen, both in an L wrench and a T wrench works really well, 2.5 and 4. Phillips flathead, a couple different sizes of punches, smaller screwdriver. And then you also need some little picks to dig the stuff out of the bolt holes with, so you can get a good grip with the Allens. You want to get them all the way down in the bottom of these bolts and try to loosen them so you don't strip them out. So when I pull this out of the press, I put a zip tie on it just to keep them all together. This is a lead clamp and a tail clamp. So I'm just going to cut that off. And then you can see as this comes out, there's two springs here that push the clamps apart. There's these two plates here that actually mount it to the press with. You got two 4mm bolts that go on each one of these here. And you'll notice when you pull this apart that one end of this is longer than the other. The long portion goes to the tail edge of the clamp. If you try to put the long portion in this clamp here, it actually will bottom out. So this groove here, this goes in, you can see it goes all the way through that. Actually, a hole is a hole that goes completely through there. Whereas on the lead edge, it's not. So if you try to put the long end in the lead edge, it actually bottoms out. So that's just make sure when you put it back together that you know where you're putting it, the proper place that you're putting it. Okay, so I'm going to take those out. So that's pretty much the only loose parts you have to worry about now. I'm going to put this tail clamp out of the way for a moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to tear this face plate off and remove all the inner parts off here. The main part, this bar here, typically, unless you've had to rebuild the clamp 2 or 3 times, you can reuse this. But once they get so bad to where these lock pins here, these lock pins are what you use to lock your plate with here. You can see when I pull that, how that bottom portion comes up. See that moving there. Actually, I do it without a wrench. So what we're going to do is, first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the back bolts. There's 4 bolts in the back here. We're going to remove those out of there, and those go through spacers. There's a spacer there, 2, 3, 4. So those go through those spacers and lock the faceplate on. Excuse me. So we're going to go ahead and loosen those up, and I'm going to need my 4mm Allen wrench to get that loose. More than likely, these are typically pretty tight. And these don't really have any stuff in them to dig out. These are always pretty clean. Just loosen it with that. And they're pretty tight sometimes. Okay, I just got them loose. Now I can go in with my T-wrench and spin them out. These are pretty messy sometimes inside. They're pretty nasty. Okay, all 4 of those bolts are loose. Now I can just turn it upside down. I should be able to just tap them out of there. Just push them out, and I want to keep the spacer don't want to lose the spacer. So there's one spacer, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to keep these bolts separate than the face bolts because these bolts are different length. So you got these 4 millimeter bolts that essentially screw into here, and they lock this to the bar. So we're going to take all this stuff and clean it up here. Actually, I'm going to leave those bolts out of there. Okay, now I need to get these out of here, these Allens out of here. But before I can do that, I got to dig the stuff out of them. Make sure I get my Allen all the way down in there. Paper clip will work. If you don't have a, this happens to be a dental pick. Okay, now these actually are also the adjustment screws to put more tension on your plate as it's all locked in the machine. But in order to move these, there's a hidden screw back here, right here. That's a 2.5 millimeter Allen. There's 4 of them. One screws down on top of the threads of each one of the 4 millimeter bolts that go through the face. And you don't want them super tight because they'll ruin the threads. So essentially they're just, unless they've never been loosened before, this clamp acts like it's has never been open before. It's a new style clamp. I'll show you the difference between a new style and an old style. Boy, that was tight, jeez. Okay, so when I loosen these, I just want to loosen them maybe a half a turn, not very far. You're just backing the threads off. They just screw right down onto this bolt. This bolt screws all the way through there, and then that little set screw just locks on the thread, so this can't move. So if you're going to make this adjustment, you have to loosen this first. And when this is mounted in a press, there's not much room, so you have to use an L wrench. You got to sneak up in there and hope that you can get it just right, find it, and then loosen it like, you know, one full flat is really all you need to loosen. If you put it in there, you'd loosen it to there. Okay, now I should be able to use this to pull these out of here now. If you want to speed it up, you can use a cordless screwdriver with a 4 millimeter bit in it. You don't want to start them with that, though. You want to always start them by hand so you don't cross thread them. So when you order the parts to rebuild this from us at Ryobi Press Parts, there's going to be 2 options for old style and new style. What that pertains to is the bracket, which is this little thing right here. There's a new style and there's an old style. If you look real close, you see that's a small stem. That's an old style. That's a new style. The top portion is exactly the same size. Actually, this one's about 1 millimeter larger. Maybe half a millimeter. And you have to know this before ordering so that you get the correct one. So I can actually see that pin goes right in there. I'm going to knock that out. That's the part that the lock pin turns against. It actually makes all the motion. So this wears and that wears. So we're going to knock this out of here. But if you have the wrong pin, the small pin, it won't work. So the way you can identify that without tearing it apart, because you don't want to tear it apart till you get the new parts for it, is this little guy right here, this little pointer. This little pointer is mounted on this faceplate, the lead edge faceplate, and it goes right down here. So this pointer here happens to measure 8 millimeters high. This is the new style. This is bigger. The old style, this pointer, the height of it is only 5 millimeters high, so it's about that thick instead of that thick. You can see that right on, without even taking it out of the press yet, you can see on that pointer. So that's the way to determine if it's old style or new style. Okay, so we're going to take this. So I'm going to take all these little parts here. Now here we can see the difference in the bolt size. This is the bolt that held the back of the faceplate on it, and this is the bolt that goes through the front. I believe they're about, not much, maybe 2 millimeter difference, but that does make a difference, because if you put the long bolt in this hole right here, it actually will go through into that groove, and that happens to be where your this is going, so it will have an effect on that. So that's the importance, making sure, and there's not much difference, but there is difference. One's 2 millimeters longer. The long one goes in the back, the short one goes in the front. Okay, so we got one off. I'm going to take this one off. Then I'm going to go clean everything up. I don't need to show the video on that. So in the rebuild kit that you get from us, all these parts will be new. We do give new bolts for the front, but not for the back, because those bolts, you can see the bolts in the back look like brand new. They always do. So we do give new bolts for the front here. If you look real close, you can probably see, yeah, you can see where that set screw that comes to the top screws on the threads. I can see right there where the threads are kind of shiny, where it's screwed right down on there. There's another one right there. You can see the spot right there. So it just enough friction goes down to tighten this so this can't turn. You can force this to move it if you want to make an adjustment without moving that, but you'll ruin the threads. You'll rip the teeth right off the threads of that bolt and wreck it. So, okay, and the same thing on the back here. You can actually see how there's wear. There's a groove worn that, and that comes from that lock pin. As you turn the lock pin to lock your plate, this edge comes up to hits that and forces this in like this against this clamp. This is setting on there, and this has teeth on it, real fine teeth, and you can see that has teeth on it. If all these teeth are completely gone, you may have to replace these plates. We do also stock these here, so any parts you need for inside here, more than likely we have. So then you got these little springs here that push the clamp, help push it up against, tight against the faceplate. There's 2 on each side right there. And the holes in here, if you just look, they bottom out all at the same height. You can put it mistakenly in that hole, but the spring disappears. That's where a bolt goes down inside there. So we're going to put those over there. Now another thing we're going to do is we're going to take these bolts out. A lot of times these springs get smashed. Typically that's because people either using too long of a plate, or they're over tightening the bolts, and the head goes all the way down and flattens the spring out. So we also give new springs with a kit. All the small black springs, these bolts, they get rounded off quite often. These lock pins, and the brackets, the little bracket pieces here. Okay, so the only thing I have left to take out, I'll get this bolt out of here. You can see how that spring is just smashed. The new spring is a lot longer. I'll show you a comparison when I go to reinstall it. Now what we got to do is we got to knock a roll pin out to get this out. Now if this can come out of here, this lock pin can come out of here without punching one of these pins out, then this bar's wore so bad, new parts may not even make a difference. You need to replace this bar. This one is nice and tight. This one happens to be nice and tight in there. So I just have a black piece of metal here that I use, and then I just need a punch, and I'm going to knock one of these screws out, or I'm sorry, one of these roll pins out, just about halfway. Just knock it a few times there, and then turn this sideways, and it should not quite pull out, a little bit more. There we go. Actually felt it go through to the wood on that one. So then that comes out. Put that over there to get cleaned up too. Oops. Oopsie. Do the same thing here. I'm just gonna, one of these two pins I'm just gonna knock out about halfway. And turn that and pull it out like so. So we're going to take and clean this all up. Then we're going to take and clean this all up. This is the faceplate. Hot water and blanket wash should get a lot of that off. I'll dig all around to these ends with a dental pick, scrape all that so you can see the difference on it. And then we'll get the new parts and we'll put it back together. Okay, they're all clean now. There's the base clamp. Got all the areas cleaned out nice and clean. This is the face clamp that has the little teeth on it. If you look real close, it'll actually kind of sparkle. Again, this is a new style clamp because it's got the big pointer down here. If it was an old style clamp, that pointer would be 2/3 that size, height this way. It'd be like 1/4 of an inch or so. Okay. So you can get this little kit from us. It's got a couple lock pins, a couple of blocks, 4 of the small black screws, or 4 of the small black springs, 2 of the larger springs that go under the lead bolt, lead adjustment bolt, and then the 4 new screws that go through the front, which are shorter than the ones that come to the back. I can head that out of there. Okay. Now we have to get this bracket out of the back of there, and again you can see the wear that's in that. It's got like a groove cut in it, and that's from the lock pin turning on it. What happens is this turns against this. Where's the edge of that, and where's the groove in that? So we're going to knock that out and put a new one in there. I just use a little plate of steel here. They don't come out too hard. Just like that. Just pops out. And we'll turn around and put a new one right back in. I happen to already have these cleaned. Typically you'd knock that out before you clean. So I'm going to just start that in there. I'm going to use a little bit bigger punch on that one. I know it's home as soon as she starts bouncing like that. Okay, so that's one. There's the other one. A little groove cut in it. What'll happen, that groove will eventually get down to the bottom of that, and this will crack and fall and break into little pieces. So that's why you have to replace that. Okay. So we're going to start by putting our little black springs in. I'm just going to dip the tip of that in grease. Got just a little white lithium grease there. That way when we go to tear it apart again, they won't be stuck in there. A lot of times they'll rust and stick in there. And you can see, because these are new springs, how far they stick out also. A worn spring will stick out about half that far. Okay, now these here will only go on one way. If I try to put this on the wrong one, you see it won't go down. That little stop there is wrong. So this here this goes on this side. So but before we can do that, we got to put the lock pins in. Again, I take a little grease. Just paint a little on there. And before I do this one, I'm just going to show where you only have to knock one of those pins out. Oh, that one's gone halfway. You can see it right there. And then you can, because this has a groove in it, if you try to go in this way, it won't go in because that pin won't allow it, because of the, if I put the flat side towards there, then it slides right in. Slides right in like that. But one of these two pins has to be knocked out halfway in order for you to do that. So we'll put this in there that's got the grease on it. And I'll put this one on this side. Better to have too much grease and not enough in here. That looks pretty good. Okay, now we got to set those pins. Just want it flush or just below flush a little bit. Yeah, that's good right there. So just flush is good. And then, so now, these just kind of set up on there. And again, you can't get them on backwards because it won't. There's a right and a left. Okay, now I'm going to grab these little, it looks like a rooftop of a house. It's called a block. But a lot of times these get, when you can tell these are worn, this edge right here is supposed to be kind of sharp. And it gets rounded. The edges on this get rounded. And it won't grab your plate properly. So it's best just to replace these. A lot of times they'll crack here and here. There's not much meat there. They get rusty and bad and they crack right there. So I'm going to take and put a little grease on this. Then we're going to use our short screws. And I'm just going to tap these with the grease too. Just start them in there. Now I can take it down a little ways. I would usually do this after I get the faceplate on, but I'm just going to show here how this works. So now that this is kind of put together, I'll go a little bit farther here. I got to screw it in a good bit further here. Try to keep that about parallel, about 4 millimeters or so. Now when you turn this here, you can see it come forward. If you can see that plate come forward. So this comes forward and pinches the top plate, touches the top plate, which pinches the printing plate. All right, I'm going to take and put a little grease on this one. Just going to tip the screws in the grease too. Make sure that's perfectly straight up when you screw it so it isn't cross-threaded. Because the angle of this makes you want to maybe go in at an angle, but it's not. You got to go straight up. Like so. Now we're going to screw these in a ways. Okay, now we need to mount the face plate on the front of there, and that'll only go on one way also. I mean, it'll go on that way, but you can tell there's no, the grip isn't going to hit the face plate there. The back plate is not going to fit the face plate. So, just set it on there, and then these are all the old parts I cleaned. I'm going to take these spacers, just going to lay them in there one at a time and bring a screw in from the back to go through the spacer. It'll kind of thread itself right in there, and then I'm going to bring it all the way tight and then back it out about one turn. And I'm going to lay these in there and do all the same thing. This one I can just push it and hold it. I don't need to tighten it. I'll get them all four in spacer, and a bolt, spacer, bolt. So those are all in there. Now I can go back and tighten them all. And when I do that, it's going to bring it in to hit the spacer. And there's a rough adjustment for the clamp and a fine adjustment. Alright, so we're going to tighten all these down. Okay, so after that, now I'm going to go in with an L wrench and snug them down. Not super tight, but they got to be tight. Put I don't know how many foot-pounds of pressure, maybe 20, 25. just don't want to strip it out, because all you're doing is that screw is going in, and you're only going in about 4 threads. See, there's the tip of the bolt right there. So you're going in maybe 5 threads from here to here. But they got to be tight because it's a plate clamp. If something flies off when you're running, well, we sell parts, so you're good. It's a joke. Okay, so I'm going to bring these in for a rough adjustment to where they're just sticking up over the plate just a little bit. You see these are up a good bit back here. We'll just take it in like that. Take it in like that. Now I want to just bring it up. And see. See how tight it is. So I have a dummy plate here I carry. Just a little section of a plate and just put in there. And I'll come this way just till the corner sticks out. The same thing down here. Now I'm going to get on the front of here and just feel, I want to just feel a little bit of tension is what I'm looking for. See, there's like nothing right there, and all of a sudden it just gets, and you're not putting a lot of tension, you're just kind of bringing it until it kind of just feels a little bit. Sometimes they move easy, sometimes they don't, but you should be able to feel the difference. Right there it just starts to tension. I'm going to just give it a little bit more after that. When you're done, these are about perfectly flush across there. If you put a line gauge across it, they are like right. Actually, that one's up just a tiny bit, and I think I might take it down just because it's, maybe I read it wrong. Okay, now to double check it, we're gonna loosen it, tighten it, just feel it. And it has a good, I think I want just a little more pressure on it. So I'm just gonna, these already have tension, but I'm just gonna move them the same amount, which is about 5 minutes. Like so. That feels good right there. See what this one is like. It's a little bit tighter. I'm going to back that one off just a tiny bit. Both of them just a little bit. That feels good. Okay, so I can loosen them both up, get my plate out of there. Now I got to bring these set screws down, and these are where it's kind of hard to tell. You just want to go until you feel, I can tell that's the edge of the bolt. I'm just screwing that right in, right onto the threads of that bolt right there, and it's just so it can't back out. So again, you just want to bring it till it's snug and give it just a little bit of pressure. This is a 2.5 millimeter Allen here. And this is a 4 millimeter in the front. That's the only 2 Allens you need. Okay, that's all put together. Now just to see the comparison, here was the tail clamp before. The lead looked pretty much the same. It looked pretty nasty. So remember, the short end goes in the lead, and this portion here, the bracket, goes out. You really can't get these in backwards, but you can get them in where you're putting the long one in the bottom of the bar instead of the top. So there you go. Now I'll just do the tail clamp, which is done exactly the same way except for this bolt here, which I didn't put in here yet. So let's get back to that. The lead bolt here goes in. This is the one that you actually put the pressure on your clamp with. It just comes through, and you get a new one of these in the kit. I'm going to bring that out until that bolt is about just beyond that, because that's about where the cylinder would be. And then there you go. So that's all brand new. The same thing on this one here. Just put a little grease on the threads. Just bring it out till it's sticking out a little bit, like so. So the tail clamp bolt is different. In order to get this out, if the spring is smashed or if something's the problem here, you actually have to cut this off with a hacksaw. Cut the head off with the hacksaw. And then screw this out through here with your fingers. Then you can screw a new one in. And I have another video, the link will be below, that you can, how to install a new one of these here after you've cut this one out, the proper way to install it. So I'm going to get to work on the tail clamp. Got any questions? Right? You can reach us here at RyobiPressParts.com. That's a take.